So this is a really cool topic, one that I've been learning about a lot over the last several weeks, and talking with Jenelle has been extremely insightful. And look at this through the lens of the workplace, and look at this through the lens of the unemployment rate and some other statistics, which we're going to review with you in just a moment. And it's sort of mind-boggling, but we'll get to foundational stuff first and then work our way through. Let's introduce Dr. Jenelle Abnett. She's been working in the field of special education for over 25 years. Dr. Abnett is a full-time professor at Newman University in Ashton, Pennsylvania, and is board-certified special education advocate. Her expertise is in special education law, autism, and differentiated instructions for learning disabilities. She earned her PhD from Notre Dame of Maryland University with a focus on special ed, teaching practices, and social emotional development. She has a master's in psychology with a focus in educational therapy. Dr. Abnett is the advisor for the Newman University branch of the Eagles Autism Foundation College Program. And Dr. Abnett recently founded ndats.org, an advocacy and training company with a mission to create a more neurodiverse community. Welcome, Doctor. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.
So can you just give maybe a quick opening statement, and then we could sort of dive into a conversation, but talk sort of broadly, if you will, about your experience in neurodiversity and how you see that movement overall?
So it's a great situation we're in right now, and this stemmed out of a lot of the DEI and DEIB movement to create better workforces, create more inclusive locations. And at the same time, autism has in the last 10, 15 years really become a more mainstream. And the two together has created this movement for the neurodiverse to be more inclusive in a lot of settings. And when I started thinking about opening my own company to put this training out there, it's because all this knowledge was in education. It's been in education for years, and finally realizing that outside of education, this is an unknown topic. And so that's really where my passion came from, to expand out to different companies and to organizations and fire and police to be able, so they better understand the neurodiverse community.
That's great. And yeah, we'll talk through the lens of employment to some extent, obviously here. But I guess for those who may not know or haven't done the homework that I've done recently, I've been exposed to recently, for anybody who's not familiar with this term, can you define neurodiversity for us?
So the simplest is, brain different, right? So what it's the idea of is, instead of looking at a lot of these different individuals who's, because the way their brain is wired, processed differently, to look at it as an opening movement to, it's not a disability, it's a difference. And so neurodiversity encompasses people with autism, people with attention deficit, dyslexia, Tourette's, anything where the brain has been wired differently, that their thought process. So we're not including, those with physical disabilities like a cerebral palsy or a multiple sclerosis or things like that. It's really just in the processing of how we think.
Interesting. I appreciate that. Like I said, for those who may not know this term or not been immersed in it, I want to provide some statistics just around the neurodiverse community, and you could make you'll be able to draw the picture of how this fits into the workplace community, into organizations, into employment, etc. So here are some statistics that we've done some research on. Globally, there are 8 billion people in the world, right? And 20% of that population are neurodiverse, which is 1.6 billion people. And the unemployment rate, and again, these are global numbers, is 40% for that population. That's 640 million people. that are unemployed who are neurodiverse across the globe. So then I took that and I extrapolated a little bit further and said, okay, what does this mean for the United States? So we have 335 million people that populate the United States, with 20% of those being neurodiverse, which is 67 million people. And here's the real kicker. The unemployment rate, again, is running at around 40%, which is 26.8 million people of that category. Now, if you've talked to any recruiters recently, everybody's struggling to find workers. And here's a population of 26.8 million people that are unemployed,
Yep.
with a 40% unemployment rate. I grew up in the disabilities community, and it was a physical disabilities community. That's where I cut my teeth in HR. And that number that I just gave you, 26.8 million people unemployed, is 3 times higher than those with physical disabilities. So I was in that space 25 years ago, and we've come a long way with physical disabilities. Probably still a long way to go, but we have come a long way to have that rate, the rate for the neurodiverse, be 3 times higher than those with physical disabilities. Doctor, what's your analysis or take on those particular numbers?
So when you look at that whole group, right, and when I say things like autism and attention deficit, a lot of times we think of those that are on the more severe side. Same like with physical disabilities, you have somebody that might just need a cane to compare to somebody that is in full immobility. And so when you start looking at those that are on the higher end, and it's really just a processing, not an intellectual disability, it's an untapped source of individuals.
Yeah.
If you go out to California and look at Silicon Valley, the number of people that do coding because of the type of work that is, most of Silicon Valley identifies as neurodiverse. And so there's some brilliant minds out there that, because of social norms, they're not getting through the hiring process. They're not doing well sometimes in the job. And it's really little tweaks compared to physical disabilities where you've got to go build a ramp. These are little tweaks that we can do to really tap into their talents.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about those in a moment. But yeah, it's an interesting where you have to build a ramp for somebody with a physical disability. You have to widen the door, et cetera. We're also going to talk about ADA in a little bit as it relates to neurodiversity. But the tweaks that you're referencing, can you talk more about them? Like if there's, what did I say? 26.8 million candidates out there. Everybody needs to hire candidates, right? We're all looking for good workers, yet we're not thinking, I don't think we are thinking about this particular cohort. And so we'll drill down into that a little bit, but could you tell us a little bit more about sort of how do you use the Silicon Valley example, and I'd like to expand on that. So tell us. Yeah.
So JP Morgan and Microsoft are two of the biggest companies that have a neurodiverse program to be more inclusive to them. And JP Morgan did a study and found that individual productivity of those that are neurodiverse is 90 to 140% better productivity, fewer errors. They are 80% more loyal to the company, and so your retention rate is up over 80%. And if you have one neurodiverse person working in a team, that team's productivity is up 30%. So there's so much benefits. The way that I kind of explain it when I'm teaching it to my students is, okay, everybody went to IKEA and bought a piece of furniture, right? The crazy IKEA furniture. Do you want to watch a video to put it together? Do you want to read the directions? Or do you want someone to sit and show you how to do it? Those are just three different ways to do that. And when we stop making the workforce be only one of those ways and really open it up, you are opening up for more creativity. You are opening up for out of the box thinking. You are opening up for attention to detail. Your attention deficit population has fantastic ability to focus on more information at the same time to be able to be more productive and usually point out more critical pieces of information.
That's great information. And again, more statistics that just point to us needing to open the doors, if you will, of organizations to look at populations that we may not have looked at in the past. Let me ask you this question. In the workplace, how do neurodiverse populations, what are they behaviors do they exhibit? You used an interesting word, which is you said difference, right, in how your brain works. Describe that for us in the workplace from what you see.
Yeah, so there's so like one of the areas is executive functioning, right? And that is how you look at a task and follow the steps through. So, I had to come and be on this today. So I had to think about, what computer am I using? What am I, and all of those things to think to complete to be able to be here today, changing my schedule, whatever it took. And so when you start at the starting line and you're looking where the finish line is, that's executive functioning on any task. And how someone tackles that, if they don't do it sequential, sometimes that doesn't work in a typical workforce. But if you open up and have flexible scheduling, flexible workspace, where someone can go work quietly when they're on a project, being able to have simple things like, Microsoft Word has speech to text and text to speech and dictation, to make things easier for someone to be able to go back and look at the information you're giving. So when you're in a workforce, that's one of the areas of executive functioning. One of the other ones is social communication. We're sitting here right now and, I've got myself off the screen so I don't see myself. So Mark, I'm really only looking at you right now. And I'm making eye contact across the screen with you. If I was neurodiverse in the area that, more of the, on the autistic side, I might do the whole interview looking down like this. And so you might be thinking that I'm, like reading a magazine off to the side. I'm not. It's just this when to make eye contact, handshaking, all these things that we have created and gave them value doesn't necessarily mean that they're not good in a position. It's one of those social barriers that they do differently. And so, if I walked in and introduced myself to you, but I kept my hands behind my back, what is your first judgment of why I'm not putting my hand out and giving you a firm handshake like we used to say in the past, when you would maybe coach someone to go in for an interview.
Right. And so, so we're still living in a world of rigidity when it comes to interviewing. It sounds like there's a barrier to entry for that 26.8 million people. And we need to think about how to break down that barrier, right?
Yeah. So, and it's simple changes. Like I said, like, it's not like you got to go build a ramp. So, research says out there, why can't you give questions ahead of time? Do you really think someone's going to do so much research that they're going to become an expert on a stock answer when even through colleges, we do mock interviews down here. So having that opportunity to have an agenda, what's the time frame of the interview, who is going to be there, so that I'm not surprised by a large group of people when I thought I was only interviewing with one. Things like that, just changing the setup of how you do an interview. Maybe you turn and look at the questions together and not sit straight across the desk, right? You come into someone's office, this is their space, and you're sitting, takes us back to those days of sitting in the principal's office. We're kind of scared sitting across the big desk.
Right.
And so, just changing it, doing a round table where they can kind of sit sideways to you, or, kind of like in a diagonal rather than straight on, because then there's something else to focus on.
So it seems to me that part of your new business launch is to really get like to gauge where employers are today and help them move forward. Is that the goal?
Yeah, to really kind of create those strategies, and even just reminders that, if I just do this slightly differently, I will make that person feel more comfortable, and then they can really highlight their talents, whether in the interview or within the job.
And you used an example of Silicon Valley, and how effective and productive the neurodiverse community is. Can you give a general overview of sort of how from where you sit, the neurodiverse community is performing in organizations?
So you can take that from any level as anyone else, right? So you have in any business or organization, you have people that do more routine tasks. You have people that are, supervisors. You have people that are your more creative team. And the neurodiverse fit into any single one of those, right? The idea is that they're all different. But the bits of similarities is that they don't fit the norm. And we've been so used to the norm that stepping outside the box. And so why Silicon Valley hires a lot of them, there's people that are high functioning autism and those with attention deficit. Their ability to take in information and focus on tiny details. And how good is that for coding?
Sure.
Where they would struggle would be more in the social interactions. So sarcasm, you need to be a little bit more straightforward, which this day and age is actually helping them, because we're relying a lot more on, Teams, text messaging, emails, and that gives them time to process their answer. For those that have dyslexia or dysgraphia with writing and reading, they have time to process the information. The point that I can have my email read to me. And we remove some of the social side of it that might make them struggle.
Yeah, so it seems to me we've talked a little bit about interviewing and sort of that whole process. It seems to me, based on what you just said, that we need to rethink how we do performance management in organizations as well, because if you're rating and ranking someone on the traditional norms of what you have done historically, the neurodiverse are not going to do as well. They may do extremely well on the actual productivity skill set side, but on the behavioral and soft skill side, they're not going to do as well. So we need to sort of think about performance reviews differently.
Yeah. So in prep for this, I, love playing around on AI right now. And so I put into AI, what are the top 3 questions? Give me the top 3 questions I should use in a standard interview. And so one of them was, where do you see yourself in 5 years? The second one is, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And the third one is, tell me about a time when you worked well on a team, right? So the first one, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Well, that's speculation. Where do I see myself in 5 years? Hopefully sitting on a beach with a Mai Tai in my hand, right? Like that's what we all
Right.
hope to see ourselves in. And that might be my most honest answer, but that's not going to get me the job.
Right.
And second one, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Well, anyone that's prepped anyone that's neurotypical for this, it's actually a lying question, right? What's my weakness? Oh, I have to time management because I find myself so engrossed in something that right? Like we come up with these answers that spin a weakness to a positive. And so it's a stock answer that people practice and train on. The third one, which is what I love, this one is really great for neurodiverse, is tell me about a time in detail who was there, what the project was about, and what was your part in it. Well, that's very, very sequential. It's very laid out. It's very specific oriented. And it's something that already happened. So I don't have to speculate. So I don't have to put myself, which is the idea of theory of mind, I don't have to put myself somewhere where I haven't been yet. I can give a literal answer and say, there was this time that we were working on this, and it was my supervisor and two of my coworkers, and here was the problem, and here was my contribution to it. And that question really gives you a better look at the skill set.
Right. But I guess what you're saying is, Anna, did you have somebody in the chat that you wanted to?
Yeah.
Okay.
There is a question. Is neurodiversity a self-defined term, or does an individual have to be diagnosed as neurodiverse?
So no, neurodiverse. So most diagnoses come out of what they call the DSM, which is like the psychological manual of all disabilities. You won't find neurodiversity in there. You will find the disabilities that fit under that umbrella. So you'll find attention deficit, you'll find autism, you'll find bipolar, you'll find Tourette's, you'll find all your learning disabilities, your dysgraphia, your dyscalculia. Where neurodiversity comes in is it's really almost, I really want to almost use the idea of like it's a movement. It's an ideal to take away that it's not a disability, that they think differently. For example, I graduated high school. My parents actually, here's an honesty thing. My parents actually had to pay for a tutor after my graduation so that I could get my high school diploma. I walked across that stage with a certificate of attendance because my parents were very involved in my high school. Then I went off to college and there was different ways to learn. And so I was able to do papers and projects, and those were my high grades compared to tests. And so the idea of neurodiversity is someone's brain processes differently, and we just have to open up society to not so norms in how we do things. I hope that answers it.
I think we may have some more.
Yeah.
I believe so. Anna, go ahead.
Someone asked if there are any specific recruiting agencies or job boards that cater to neurodiverse folks and going to businesses to educate and bring this pool of talent to businesses to help fill these open positions.
So that's kind of two parts. So one, that is what I do, is that I bring kind of this training to an organization and kind of look at, your setting. Do you have space, within your office for, a quiet space so that someone could process through something if they wanted to focus? To work on what are your hiring, practices, where could we do your hiring? So, that's some of what I do besides teaching here at the university. There are organizations out there that on the other side that are supporting during transition time. So if they're coming out of the schools, out of colleges, things like that, that are supporting the hiring population on the other side. And then there's companies that are partnering, like I said, JP Morgan, Microsoft, and all the way down to ones that aren't so much for your higher functioning, but like Starbucks. Starbucks is amazing at supporting, those that might be more moderate on the autism spectrum. And, and what's great about Starbucks is it's very routine, right? There's the steps to follow to make each drink. And so it's able to be taught so that they can so that they can excel at, at a major company like that.
Great questions. Much appreciated. And I think you may have another.
Nope, I think that's it.
That's it now for now. Okay, good. Thanks. So I want to go back to something, Jenelle, if we could, and that is you talked a little bit about, we've talked about interviewing, we've talked about hiring, we've talked about performance reviews, right? We've talked about placement. You have this 26.8 million population. Everybody needs jobs and so forth. You did mention something about sort of communication within the organization, assuming that I get through the interviewing process and I get hired and so forth and so on. Now I'm in the company, and you talked about chat and Slack and Teams, and some other things. So can you talk a little bit more about sort of what works and what doesn't work within organizations, so that, when we look at our culture, when we look at our employee population, and we're bringing someone with neurodiversity into the workforce, we're able to open up our arms and make sure that they're included, and that we're making those modifications that are necessary for them to be successful?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'm picturing, right, like, is my visual mind. So now I'm hired, right, and I got to show up on Monday for my job. Most companies do a really, really good job putting out, the job specs for Indeed, or for wherever they're going to list the job. But when they come in, do you have a manual of what the job is? So a little bit deeper into what the tasks are, what your expectations are, things like that. So almost like a manual to what the job is. And there's certain places that have things like that, but there's a lot of jobs that don't. And so where to get started kind of doesn't come, quite so easy for some. And then just flexibility. I mean, the true thing is flexibility. Do you need to, let's say you're a company that has all cubicles, right? That might not work for someone that's neurodiverse. So is there an opportunity, whether not all the time, but is there an opportunity that there's a space that they can go in and close the door to focus? And if not, do we have some noise canceling headphones, in the supply closet right next to the Post-it notes, so that they can, grab a set of headphones, put them on, and be able to, go into focus on what they want to work on. So flexible work locations. I wouldn't put some of them that have higher sensitivity to smells and things like that. I wouldn't put them next to the faculty lounge, or to the break room, because,
Sure.
somebody heats up last night's, takeout.
Right.
That might be a trigger for them. Mine
Right.
is actually, I'm in that worst case scenario. If I go out my door, the microwave is literally to the left. And, if somebody's heating up broccoli, like, I'm doomed, like, I got to go take a walk. So, and these are things that, you could say, oh my God, I can't stand broccoli smell either. But when you start having a whole bunch of them, then that's where it kind of falls under the neurodiverse. And we have to kind of like understand that there just needs to be accommodations. And most of them coming into the workforce, they'll tell you what they need. I have a student that is actually graduating in 3.5 years with her 4-year degree. She's absolutely brilliant. After every assignment is described, especially if I give choice on how to do it, I have to go to her. Do you want to do it this way or this way? And then I give her, on a Post-it note or on an index card, it takes me 5 minutes to give her like a checklist. So you want to, go grab 2 articles, then you want to outline this, then you want to kind of answer this question, and then that will help you write your paper. And so sometimes it's breaking down big projects into smaller steps. Creating timelines. Timelines are fantastic, right? So if you give a project and you say, okay, I want, this marketing thing out in 2 weeks, well, Mark, you're pretty much, you've been up through the ranks doing that. So what does that look like? In a week, I should see this. In a week and a half, I should see this. This should be on so-and-so's desk by week 3 so that week 4, this is going out to print.
Yeah, so
So
it's really
timelines, schedules, things like that.
so it's really it's change management, as we used to say, for ourselves in organizations, right? We just need to think differently. But it doesn't seem that it's so overwhelming that, like I said again, and I'll keep using this statistic because I can just find it amazing that 26.8 million people. I think there's a trade-off, right? And that's what I hear you saying, Jenelle, is that there's a trade-off. If you want this population to be high performers, first of all, if you want to get them in the door,
Yeah.
secondly, if you want them to be high performers, there's a trade-off and you have to modify.
Yeah. And I think I saw as a question flashed up is I saw the word culture pop up. And it's really what it is it's opening up the culture, that a mindset that we can do things differently.
Right.
If I asked everybody here to draw a circle in the sky, some people are going to go this way, some people are going to go this way, and there's going to be the person that starts at the bottom and goes up and around. It's just changing the mindset that there's not only one way to do things.
I think Adam may have that question.
Yeah, it was just, how does an organization begin to develop a culture or simply introduce the idea of neurodiversity, and that they want to begin valuing this idea to existing neurotypical staff?
I think the easiest, well, first of all, I would bet that in any organization you have neurodiverse individuals working there already.
Right.
With the number
Right.
of people, you have
Yep.
neurodiverse in there. And so just like you do for a cultural difference or an ethnic difference, you kind of create a task force to look at your organization and where can we make some of those modifications. So where could we put a space that if someone needed to, get out of the group setup that a lot of, office space is or workspace is, that they can do that? Do we have opportunities for, how do we use our emails? How do we use our Teams? I cannot stand when someone calls me on Teams and it pops up as in the middle that I'm working on something. So people know to email me first. And then when I want to work on something, I silence my emails in like 20-minute segments so that I have that opportunity to zero in on what I'm doing. So to change the culture, I think it's kind of just looking at what are those things like we talked about that are really beneficial and supportive of neurodiverse, and how many of them are easy to do within your organization. Because what's happening is the neurodiverse that are in the workforce, they're masking. And what masking is a really big term that's you'll hear if you start reading things on neurodiversity. And Mark, maybe you've seen this, is that they put on a neurotypical face during the day. And so they have practiced how to make eye contact. They've practiced how to shake a hand, but they go home and they're exhausted, right? We've all gone to conferences, we've all presented, and, you feel like you got to be on, and then you go home and, you tank out. But they're doing that on a daily basis. And so if we just relax the environment to different ways to do things, you're starting to create that culture.
Yeah, I think the culture question is a great one, because it really does require sort of an organizational mindset shift, right? And then I love the answer, which is a task force or something like that, that people have a vested interest in going around and seeing how we could be open to this population and bring them in and be inclusive and have them be contributing members and so forth. So I love both the question and the answer. Anna, was there something else?
Yes, just was the stat 26.8 million or 8 million? I believe it was 26.8.
It was 26.8. So the numbers
Yep.
are the population is a neurodiverse population is about 67 million people. And of those, 40% are unemployed. So that's 26.8 million people that are unemployed that are considered neurodiverse.
And as an HR organization, you know, JP Morgan's study, the stat that I love is that they're 90% more loyal and the retention rate is at 90%. And they're 90 to 130% more productive.
Right.
So how do you not hire, you know,
Yeah, sure.
if you match the right job to them? And that's really making, you know, those skills that match.
Well, again, that's part of your role, right? I think in terms of what you see organizations not doing right now, and that's what you're trying to get them to start thinking about doing.
Yeah, because it's getting them in the door.
Right.
It's removing what we used to classify as value, right? A firm handshake, good eye contact, being able to, you know, give answers to those the stock interview questions that really show a social interaction. How do they answer the question? How do they, you know, take on something, talk about a weakness of themselves? Those are social skills. And not that social skills aren't important in a workforce, but they're not always the skill to get the job done. A person in Silicon Valley that's coding might literally not talk to someone for days because they're so into their computer processing that, you know, they're not in a social field. And so, you know, yeah, there's jobs that they'd be good at that they're not. I had to do an Excel spreadsheet and do data collection. That is horrible for me. I am so social that data entry, I would be absolutely horrible at. And that doesn't matter whether you're neurotypical or neurodiverse, but we just have created an older pattern of what the gatekeeper looks for to get, you know, to get in the door.
Sure. I heard you mention something earlier, which I wrote down, and I just want to ask you about, because I think it's a bigger topic, right? You were using one example of, you said sarcasm.
Yeah.
Can't use sarcasm. Expand on that a little bit. Like, tell us what we can, what we should be doing.
Great story. This is probably this little boy, Alex, was my muse. He's probably in his 20s now, and I'm still telling the story of him in third grade. He was a student of mine. He was third grade. He was so strong in math. He was in fifth grade math in third grade with autism, diagnosed and had an IEP, had a, you know, special ed services for autism. He could read at a fifth grade level, but he read like a robot. He pronounced brand new words perfectly, but he wasn't storytelling. And then his comprehension of things, he couldn't do, right? So we have things like sarcasm, figurative language, excuse me, figurative language and idioms. So Alex is sitting in his math class and he gets pushed up into the fifth grade math class. And Alex had a rule, and this is how sequential we have to be. Alex, some part of your body must touch the chair that is your chair in the classroom. So if he needed to stand up, if he needed to sit on the floor, wherever he needed to work, giving him that space. But we created the rule that some part of his body, so he would sit next to the chair, he would lay across the chair, but we knew that that was Alex's space. I'm out in the hall. We have a substitute teacher, his aide that would go with him just to get him from classroom to classroom and give him his breaks, came out in the hall to talk with me. And the substitute teacher looked at him and goes, Alex, you're so wiggly. Do you have ants in your pants? Alex had his pants off in less than 2 seconds, and the entire class is laughing at him because it's literal to him. He thought the teacher knew that there were ants in his pants and that it had nothing to do with his wiggles because he didn't make that correlation in the metaphor and you know,
sure.
And so that's difficult. When I answer something sarcastic to you, going, you know, like, oh, that was fantastic. It's my body language. It's my nonverbals right? And these are all learned as unspoken hidden curriculum that is not easy for them to process. And so we teach some of it, but that causes them to have to mask.
Right. Now that's interesting because today I had an interaction with Dave Forbes, who heads our recruiting line of business, and it was about an event tonight that I couldn't make and he was going to make, and he said, do I need to bring anything? And I said something about your bubbly personality. Well, again, I guess, right, I made the mistake there. Not necessarily the mistake, I don't want to look at it that way, but
No.
it's just a way of thinking differently, right?
Right. And if you looked at him and said, oh yeah, well, you're required to bring the ham, right? Like if you said something, but if you said it straight faced, and someone hasn't learned you as quickly as a neurotypical, right? Like if you said that to a person on the street, they might be able to catch that sarcasm.
Yeah.
But a person that's neurodiverse, that might take them longer.
Right.
And therefore they may show up at the event, with a boar's head ham.
And I did it, to make matters worse, I did it via email.
Yeah.
So that just compounds things, I guess. But that's really interesting, the way to get us thinking differently about this. I did a little homework on something, and then we're getting close to wrapping up. So I want you to talk a little bit about this. There are the research that I did indicated there are several simple things that organization can do to support neurodiversity in the workplace. We've talked a lot about them, but there was a list of 5 that I found, and I'd like you to just talk about each of them quickly, if you would. Give us your insight, what you see, and what you'd like to see. Adopt inclusive hiring practices. We talked a bit about it, but anything else you'd like to add there?
No, I mean, it's just changing that social interaction and really focusing on the skills. So send questions ahead of time, use past scenarios, things that actually did happen, rather than, what would you do in a situation? Tell me about a situation that you did. So just changing some of your questions would help the hiring practice.
And we ask those questions all the time. How would you handle? Right? We're trying to get people to tell us, sort of thinking in like, this problem comes your way, how would you handle it? And you're suggesting they're not, a neurodiverse population may not do great with that.
No, but question. You could say, like, let's say you say, how would you handle if, the marketing stuff we needed didn't arrive? You might say, have you ever at a time where, something that you needed for a project didn't arrive, right? So now can they go back into their history, which is, factual and literal rather than predictable.
Interesting. The next one is I love this one, by the way. I just want to hear your thoughts on it. Take a strengths-based approach.
So those that are neurodiverse have been identified as having a much more creative mind, outside of the box thinking. So if you interview someone that is neurodiverse, find out what are those strengths, so that you can match them, rather than saying, oh, well, we saw this and this, that's, going to be difficult. The strengths usually outweigh what needs to be accommodated for what might be difficult for them.
Yeah, and there were so many links to that article that talked about innovation, problem solving, and all of that type of stuff, which is what we value as organizations. They're the people we want. So again, tying it back to the large N, because there is a large N out there of neurodiverse people. And think about it. Creativity, innovation, problem solving, they're all the things that we're recruiting for today.
And that's their strengths. Because they look at things differently. And they have a very visual mind too. So, like sketching things out, creating timelines, wipe off boards in your meeting room so that someone can, put it up visually, using PowerPoints and, even, agendas. These are simple things that we can do that would really support that visual, view of what's happening, agendas, things like that.
I think we talked about this. If there's anything additional, feel free to chime in here. Provide reasonable adjustments, reasonable accommodations.
Yeah, it's funny because you said that you came from the physical standpoint and,
Yeah,
what it would cost to put an elevator in or to,
sure.
put a ramp in is very expensive. But you could, go out, write the check and do it. And it's done by, in 2 weeks, right? Like it just is there. This is a cultural shift. So while it's doesn't cost the money, because but it's a mindset switch. And so sometimes that's not the easiest one to do.
Right, right. No, that's a really good point. Yeah, you can cut the check and have the lift put in, but this is more between our ears, if you will, right?
Yeah.
It's more like we have to think differently about it. We're not writing a check to have a contractor come in. Um, Build awareness and trust.
Yeah. So I find that those that are neurodiverse, because you can read a person, right? And there's some people that are really good at reading a person right away. And that's not as easy for someone that's, neurodiverse. So building that trust in the relationship makes it easier for them to relax, to not mask, to be themselves. And when you're relaxed and you can be yourself, then your innovation, creativity, and all of that, you have the trust to kind of answer in and be part of it because you're not trying to, be the round peg in the square hole.
Yeah, the masking concept was just eye-opening to me. I've heard you say it several times now, and just it's got to be exhausting, right?
Yeah.
To do that all day and then finally let go when you leave. The last one, Doctor, is celebrate uniqueness.
I mean, do you want, what do they say? Like, autism and neurodiversity is a bouquet of flowers. And, to only have one flower ever, taking that into organizations. How many times have you done like one of those SEI inventories to try and put together the best, team to do something? This is another different style.
Sure.
And so they bring something to the table. And that goes back to that strength idea that, to realize that they do, there is value there and they're going to look at things differently. And they're also going to look at things for the neurodiverse population, right? They're going to, you're marketing an item and you're trying to decide where to display it in a grocery store. You want to know if it's something, you want to know where everyone's going to go look for it to buy that. And you need to also know where would the neurodiverse look.
Right. Interesting. Janelle, if you would, sort of in closing comments, give us big picture thoughts about what you see, what you'd like to see employers do, and then we could learn a little bit more about you so that everybody leaves with the takeaway here.
So my big picture takeaway on all of this, and when I do trainings, whether it's for organizations, for police, how to do your job and how whether you're supervising someone or they're going to be your coworker. If you just take a second and find out how they prefer to do it, that's all you really have to do. It's just allowing openness for them to also sit at the table.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, by the way,
Absolutely.
today. This has been
Thank
extremely enlightening, and our discussions over the last couple of weeks have also been really enlightening for me personally and professionally. Why don't you give our audience some contact information, what you do, your company's name, where to get you, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So my company's name is Neurodiversity and Autism Training Solutions, or ndats.org. And I do advocacy work. I do trainings. I can come and look at your environment as an organization, talk about your hiring. Maybe you have some openings coming up, and you want to look at how to change your hiring practices. So I think even if you type in my name, my company will come up, but it's Neurodiversity and Autism Training Solutions.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Great discussion. I appreciate the time, and thank you all for your questions for the doctor. I think they were all informative and insightful. Hopefully, from my perspective, there were great answers, and so this was a lively and interesting discussion.